the motivation for why we're doing this now. And then I will look at and we'll review the change in release management processes. I have some documentation of those, which we can briefly review, and you can go back and read the details in your own time. And then we'll spend time looking at the repository itself to see how the issues are managed, issues and releases are managed within the repository. We'll take a quick look at just 9.1.0, which did just get released earlier this week and is now available on the Semantic Arts website. Yeah, and please interrupt with any questions or comments, because this is really more of a show and tell presentation. It's not a formal presentation, so we can generate discussion. Yeah, and then after looking at the processes we're working on, I'll give a brief review of our new GIST style guide, which is a compilation of standards and conventions that we've adopted for GIST development moving forward. And then if we have time, there is a particular issue that we'd like to get everybody's feedback on. We've been discussing it quite a bit over the last couple of months, and we have a number of different views about how to approach it. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to get everybody's input. And issue number 188, you always know when you've been spending too much time in the GIST repository when you know the names of the issues by heart.
And that there's 188 of them.
Okay, so why did this happen right now? Well, like I said, I came into Semantic Arts almost a year ago. I think at that time the GIST repository had already been made public. I'm not sure exactly when that happened. And I noticed a lot of really interesting discussions happening in emails, and I noticed issues being put into the repository, and I was putting issues into the repository as I started working with GIST. And then it kind of dawned on me that nothing was actually ever happening with those issues. And I thought, well, you know, if people are going to put issues in, the expectation is normally that somehow they're going to be addressed. You either decide, yes, we'll implement those, or no, we're not interested in that, but in some way keep things moving along. And also the idea of pulling discussions out of email threads into the GIST repository allows those discussions to be preserved historically, so that somebody new to the discussion who wasn't in on an email thread, you know, can still review the entire thread and understand the discussion, and that gets preserved. It doesn't get lost in people's inbox. These are all kind of obvious things. So the motivation was to systematize the handling of issues. And then the other motivation is to standardize. So Semantic Arts is growing. I guess GIST was originally kind of Dave's brainchild, and then Michael started working on it. For a long time, I think it was just a couple of people. But as Semantic Arts grows and as other external ontologists use GIST, there's an increasing need for standardization so people can develop according to common standards, which results in, you know, high quality and consistent product. So both not only for a Semantic Arts ontologist, but as external ontologists making contributions, if we have articulated standards and guidelines, that helps you as well. So the outcomes of this kind of thinking were two: this change in release management process and the style guide, which is very much nascent. We've only got a couple of things in it right now. So now I'm going to go over to the repository. So I am looking right now at a feature branch that I've been putting documentation into. So this is not yet on the develop branch. If you want to review it, you'll need to be on the feature documentation branch. So I've added here 3 new documents: this change in release management submission guidelines, which tells people how to submit issues and pull requests, and then this style guide. So,
Hey, Rebecca, can I interrupt for a quick second? Do we
Yeah.
need to remind people what they need to do to get access to this?
Yeah, if you could send around
access,
email, that would be great.
How many
just
people who are
it's a
not
link.
from how many people who are not from Semantic Arts already have access and tend to go in now and again?
Well, everybody has access. It's public. But I can
The whole
send,
thing is super public. Okay.
but I'll just add to the chat. Let's see, where's the chat?
And do you need some?
Mark, can you just add the link to the repository in the chat?
Yeah.
Thanks.
And do you need any additional permission to put an issue in here, or is that possible?
No, you don't need, I mean, you need to have a GitHub account. That's
Yeah.
the only thing you need.
Okay.
And then I will, anybody can add an issue, which is,
Right.
part of the beauty of this system, right? So anyway, so I have these documents. I don't want to bore everybody to death. I want to discuss these at sort of the right level of granularity to keep people interested and keep it relevant. So I'll try to find that point, but if I'm not finding it, just tell me to slow down or speed up or skip over stuff that's not interesting to you. So the overall process looks like this. The first thing is we decided a policy for versions and version numbering. And this follows a well-known standard called Semantic Versioning 2.0.0. There are, and this is, been around for a long time, the idea of major minor patch. But what does that mean exactly for ontologies? A major change is a non-backward compatible change. So for example, anything where reasoning would produce different results. So adding a restriction or a domain or a range, those are all major changes that would require an increment of the first major release number. Minor changes are new functionality, but that are backward compatible. So adding something, adding a class or a property. This could even be a large module that gets added. The key thing is that because it's an addition, doesn't take anything away, so it's fully backward compatible with the previous version. And a patch is just like a small bug fix, no new functionality, fixing typos, something like that. There are a couple of notes. The correction of an error, even if that's not technically backward compatible, will be considered a patch release. So our expectation is that when we have obvious errors, people have not used them or implemented them, and we will not be considering that a major release. When we alter a local name, and this is one of the issues I want to discuss later, we will deprecate the original term, and that means the release can be a minor release rather than a major release. If we took away a term without deprecating it, we'd have a major change. But we will deprecate the terms, and we now put those in a separate file called this deprecated. This is something we've been doing for a while anyway. And then the deprecated terms will have equivalent class or equivalent property assertions pointing back to the new version of the term. Any questions on that? Okay, so the overall workflow looks like this. Somebody submits an issue. We, Semantic Arts, will review and triage it, and we have these review and triage sessions at regular intervals. Currently, they're twice a month. If the issue is approved for implementation, it gets assigned to a release project, which is the project used to track issues towards a release. And then an ontologist will be assigned to complete that task. That ontologist completes the work and submits a pull request. And by the way, this doesn't have to be a semantic arts ontologist. So anybody else can submit a pull request. But only people from inside semantic arts will be able to merge those pull requests into our develop branch.
Another clarification, Rebecca, if I may jump in. The idea is nobody does any work until an issue has been triaged and an implementation has been decided. So if it's going to be done by someone outside of semantic arts, then they need to be part of the issue discussion process, or we need to hand that task to them. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to know, that's a good point to note. So in some projects, an outside contributor just creates a PR, decides I want to do this, create a PR, submit the PR, and see what happens. But we're not going to do it that way. So we're assuming that the issue gets created and it gets triaged and accepted, and then that issue, could be assigned back to you if you want to implement it. But we don't want people just submitting PRs of finished work that haven't been through the triage process. It just makes life too complicated. So then a PR has a designated set of reviewers. Once they approve it, it gets merged into develop and it will be included in the designated release. So, so as you can see, the whole process is kicked off by the submission of an issue. And as I mentioned, we want all of the issues to be channeled into GitHub issues rather than emails. So going over here, I've created some beginning guidelines for issue submission. I haven't thought through this a lot. These are just things I jotted down, and Michael had a couple of suggestions. It's really important that each issue is atomic in the sense that it deals with one single issue or bug or feature request. So you wouldn't have an issue that says, add a subclass of class X and, well, I don't know, this is a bad example, but you know what I mean. It should address just one single conceptual thing.
Maybe the guideline is something that can either be accepted or rejected in totality, and not have to cut and paste and split it too and all that.
Yes, exactly. Good way of putting it. And an exception would be, okay, if there are a whole bunch of little typos in labels, you don't need to have a separate issue for each one of those. You can bundle those into one issue. The title should be clear. So I don't know, does everybody know what a just issue looks like? So it has a title and then it has discussion, comments. So the title, we should be able to read the title and understand roughly what the issue is. It should be specific enough, not just, in this case, bad definition or something. It should be specific enough to tell us what it is. If possible, and this is something Michael very rightly pushes towards, is to include a proposal for resolution wherever you can. And because often when people find issues, they do have, an idea of what they think they'd like to see happen. The gist version number should be referenced, and you can apply labels to your issues. So let me show you how that works. We have, that's not what I want. So these are like tagging the issues for, one of the most important things is priorities. So high, medium, and low priority, the effort level, small, medium, large, the impact level. This goes back to the major, minor, patch distinctions. So when you submit an issue, you are able to add, you can add any of these labels you want to the issue. Now, you may not always know, but you don't have to do this, but you can if you think, oh, I think this is probably a medium effort. But when the issue is reviewed and triaged at Semantic Arts, that may change. Okay. So you can apply any of these labels. There's more detail here on that. Going back. Okay, so then when as I said, every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks at this stage, Semantic Arts ontologists are meeting to review and triage. And what that means is we put the issues in one of 3 buckets. Either we're not going to do it, in which case we close it. Either it's a duplicate of another issue, or we don't think it's a valid issue, and we close it. We will implement it, in which case we're going to assign somebody to implement it. Again, could be an outside contributor or one of us. We'll assign things like the labels for priority, major, minor patch, effort level, and so on. And we will assign it to a release, particular release, like is this going to be for the April release, the March release, and so on. And we mark it triage to indicate that the review has been done. We may, for smaller issues, decide at that time on the implementation, and if some larger issues will require repeated meetings to hammer out the implementation. And the third bucket is that it needs further review. We don't know yet what we want to do with it. So in that case, we will assign somebody to shepherd that issue forward, preparing discussions, alternatives, summaries of discussions, and so on for the next meeting until we can get it, so it goes around and around until we can get it into either the first or the second bucket. So then the assigned ontologist goes off, does the work, creates a pull request, and there's some guidelines here for pull requests. And this is the point at which you would want to look at that style guide to make sure you are implementing in conformance with it. And of particular importance, which I can mention later, we have a serializer tool that standardizes the formatting, which allows us to eliminate noise and get diffs from one commit to another. Pull request.
You should put that in your Git hooks folder, ideally.
Yeah.
You can run it out of command line if you want to.
Yeah. I don't know if everybody knows how to do that, but
maybe we should put some directions.
Yeah, okay.
We do have some instructions about that RDF toolkit. We could maybe fold that into a markdown file and put it in the gist.
Okay. 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 And the PR, just like the issue, should be atomic. Basically, you will be addressing a single issue in a PR, or possibly a set of very closely related interdependent issues, but not, disparate issues here and there. The point being, again, you can't then accept or reject the entire PR at once. That's dealing with 2 different things. So if a reviewer finds that the PR is not atomic, it's going to be sent back to the developer to break it up. And it should also address the entirety of an issue. If it can't, that means the issue itself should be broken up. And then if there are keywords you can put in to make GitHub do things magically, like if you put in the issue number, it will automatically close the issue when the PR is done. That's detail you can look at later. All right, so then we have a review process where, depending on the severity level of the issue, 1, 2, or 3 Semantic Arts ontologists have to approve the PR, and then it goes into the develop branch and will be folded into the next release. So our release schedule now is once a month, approximately on the last working day of the month. Each release has an associated GitHub project, which looks like this, and this is publicly available so that you can go on and see what's going into the March release, for example. At this point, there and how anybody should be able to view this, see what we're planning, and how and follow the progress. So right now we haven't had a meeting for the March release yet, so there's just a few things in here, and then okay. So then this is more internal documentation about the tasks our release manager has to perform in order to complete the release. That's not of great interest. The end result is that the release gets tagged in the repository and sent to Jamie, who will post it to the web server so it can be downloaded. So that is right now a monthly event. And let me show you quickly what went on for the February release. So this was the first time we had tried this process. So and there was not a lot of time to do a lot of interesting work. It was a lot of little bug fixes and typos, as you can see, correcting in namespace, removing some files that we didn't need anymore, more typos, adding missing labels. Yeah, it was mostly small stuff. So for you can go and look at any of the open issues and enter issues. You could add, if you see an issue that somebody else has entered that you think is important, you can add a comment to it. So the idea here is this allows everybody to be actively involved in moving in the GIST development process in one way or another, whether you want to develop or whether you just want to weigh in on the importance of an issue. Any questions so far? Okay.
No, that's excellent. Thank you.
So, looked at that. We did look at that. Okay, so the last thing really I have is this style guide. This is something very new and very, it's very small right now. We don't have much in it. But as we talk through these issues, a lot of them involve what should local names look like? What should labels look like? Should we use SCOS definition or RDFS comment or a SCOS definition or RDFS comment? Should we use RDFS label or SCOS pref label, and so on? All these things that we're gonna end up making decisions on, so that GIST becomes a consistent, uniform, high quality product that looks like, in a sense, looks like one person had written it. So here are a couple of standards we've developed for labels and local names. I won't go through those now. But this brings us, I believe, to the issue of, yes, the local names.
And just to be clear, when we say local name, this is what we used to call the fragment, but it's the little bit after the end of the namespace.
Yeah. Right. Right. So we have this issue, number 188, that we've been discussing for quite a long time. The issue is, so we've developed these conventions for what we want local names to look like. And then the question is, well, do we retrofit that to our existing terms, or is this only for new terms moving forward in the future. And this has been the subject of a lot of discussion, because obviously there's an impact if we change a bunch of URIs. People will, even though they would be the original ones would be deprecated, basically the expectation is that people would be updating, their data for the new URIs. And the question is, what do people think about doing that? Is it worth it? Is the benefit of getting uniformity and consistency in naming conventions worth the upheaval created by changing URIs?
I think so.
Was that speaking?
That was Jonathan.
Jonathan. Are you saying you think it would be a good idea to make this change?
At some point, it would be really good to have the URIs match, the IRIs to match. Timing would be up to what's ever best for the user community, but in terms of the long run, it would be nice if possible.
Let me just clarify what you're signing up for. If you're new to GIST and you haven't used it before, then most people would say, yeah, sure, do it. Let's have it be wonderful. Who it really impacts is people like Fabian and Sam and others of our clients who actually are using GIST. Different applications are driven from it, different SPARQL queries, etc. So what you're signing up for, if you say yes, we want this change, is an upgrade process where you have to change all the SPARQL queries that are used in any of your applications. If you generate triples from relational databases or spreadsheets, you have to regenerate all the triples to have new URIs. So there's a fair amount of work to be done. It's the sort of thing that you should be comfortable doing because change happens anyway, but I just want to be clear, that's what you're really signing up for.
Okay, then I retract that. I think a better mechanism would be to add a new URI that is the new name, and that way we preserve backward compatibility and provide the option for new work to use the new one, if that's an option.
So that's similar to what was, so you would suggest create a new one but not deprecate the old one?
If the cost of deprecation is that high, yeah.
Well, but there is no real cost of deprecation. You can continue to use a deprecated term. That's the purpose of deprecating instead of just removing. So if we deprecate, then really you could continue without unchanged, unaffected, until, I don't know what our standard we might never remove a deprecated term. We might always keep them. I don't know what we would decide to do. But it's
we have to get some thought to that.
Another thing to think about is if you have two and you change the name of, say, a property, and you say, well, I can just keep and use the deprecated one. But then new people come along and use the new one. Now you have to change your SPARQL queries so that you're checking the triple that has that property. You need to have it. Oh, is it the old one or the new one? So there's kind of an impact to this any which way you look at it.
Right.
I don't want to scare people away. I just want to say, here's what's involved. What do you think?
And the other thing to note, I think, is, by the way, there's an echo coming in from
somebody.
Yeah. This was new, so maybe somebody just recently.
But the other thing is that, in a way, because we version GIST, theoretically, there's no change necessary unless you decide to go with the new version, right? So people could say, look, I like the new property names. I think it's a good thing to do, but it doesn't impact me because, I'm still working on GIST 9.0.0, for example. The issue comes when, a newer version of GIST comes out that covers some new area, Internet of Things or whatever, that you like. And then you're like, oh, I'd like to move to the new one. And it's only at that point, theoretically, I guess what I'm saying is you don't always have to move just because GIST moved. But once you want to pick up something new that GIST has, that would be the moment of truth when you say, oh, well, because the new ontologies in terms of these new terms, that's when I'm going to take that impact of data, you know, transformation and such. You know, with the idea of the deprecation notwithstanding. Again, you could deprecate the terms and then you could still use the old terms, but like Michael's pointing out, unless you're running some low-level reasoning. There are some systems that don't do expensive reasoning. They just do some of it, and one of the things they typically do is equivalent properties. So you might be able to run reasoning to not have to change your queries, but that's going to be on a case-by-case basis based on how big your data is, et cetera.
I do like that idea where yeah, that sounds good.
The people who will be impacted right away would be Fabian and Sam. Do you either of you have a view on this? Do you think you'd be inclined to make the change or just not do it and live with just the way it is?
Are you expecting a direct or honest answer?
Anyone, either of you?
No, I think that ontology-wise, right, there were a lot of things that derived from the last time we worked together. And my recommendation would be to, to review it end-to-end and pretty extensively. So, so in that case, I wouldn't mind if we were to make some change in there.
Right. Okay. So you wouldn't be jumping up and down screaming if we made this change? Like, oh no, why did you do that to us?
Well, not for the moment, right? But yeah, I mean, we're kind of used to migrating from one version to another, and then we take the time to make it properly, right?
Okay, that's good. That's good information. That's kind of an important input.
Okay. Does anybody else want to weigh in? I think that's all I have. Is there anything else you would like to see more detail on, or that you're not clear on about how to submit an issue, or how to, you know, any of the stuff that I've talked about? Are there any questions?
Rebecca?
Yeah.
Could I just ask a question and perhaps also make a point about version numbering? People kind of get caught up with wanting to know when you end up with semantic versioning, you know, what actually constitutes a major and a minor change and so on. And the thing that we've been doing with the DCAT vocabulary is just to go for straight cardinal numbers, version 1, version 2, version 3, and so on, because we felt that it was a big fankle actually trying to work out, is this a trivial or is this a major? And I just wonder if you had any thoughts about the version numbering as to whether the decision as to what type of version it is, is so big that it might just be beneficial to have a cardinal numbering system.
I think that I wouldn't be in favor of that direction, because that means nobody knows then what will be required in the upgrade, whether it's going to be a major upheaval or not. And I like this system, and I think we have actually we have defined these well enough, spinning off of this semantic versioning 2.0, that it's actually decidable almost completely objectively what kind of a change something is.
Right, that's absolutely fine. Okay.
And if I could interject, I like this. I think our expectation is going to be much more living than a true standard, and given the monthly cadence, I would expect we'd have a 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, every month, chunking along, adding stuff until sooner or later we're going to say, it's 10.0 now, let's go. So, and people will, look at the difference between 9.2 and 9.3 and say, oh yeah, you just review the notes. I can slipstream that in with very little, impact analysis, and I might as well stay current. But 10.0, I better go scratch my head for a while.
I think the problem is that if you're just making minor changes from release to release, it's hard to know when you're looking back how far back you have to go before you realize that you've actually made major change. But because it's so incremental, you've been boiling the frog, and you haven't realized how much of a change you've been making because it's lots of very tiny changes.
I don't think it works that way. I don't think a large number of minor changes makes a major change. It's a large number of minor changes that never switches from one category to another just by virtue of sheer number. So there has to be some non-backward compatible change to get
that's absolutely fine.
Major change. Isn't that the way you see it, Mark?
Yeah, I'm also in favor of it for the same reasons everyone has pretty much said. If I look at just 10, I'm going to know, I got to rethink this because things are not backward compatible. The whole point of semantic version numbering, which wasn't invented here, was mainly for software. Is that if I see a 9.0.1, I have no fear of grabbing it. I think, something's going to be slightly better, like a comment or something was fixed, So, and even the features, if I pick up 9.3, nothing I have is going to break, but there's probably some new things I could use. So, I should review the notes and see if there's some new stuff I should use, but nothing's going to break. So, I do I think there's so much context in that number that you would lose with just a single digit, so to speak. That I think there's a lot of value in it.
The last thing I want to say before we drop this, no frogs were harmed in the making of this version.
This is really reassuring.
There's plenty of frogs that are already struggling on the planet at the moment.
Ribbit.
Awesome.
Seriously, I have a question, Rebecca. You showed what looked like a Kanban board of issues.
Yes.
I was trying to find that in GitHub.
Yeah. So that's under projects, and these are our current open projects.
Okay. Didn't know where to look. Thank you.
Hey Ted, while you're opened your mouth there, this is something the gist migration could affect you at Morgan Stanley. What are your views about this? If we make a colossal change 45 of the 250 URIs, is that going to make your life miserable? What do you think?
I'd have to think about it. I think it's something I could accommodate. I mean,
yeah. Okay. So again,
have to do massive edits.
It will get filtered and kind of delayed through MS Core, but
yes,
when MS Core decides to go forward, it will be a pretty much non-backward compatible.
And then everything you build on top of that, all the references, all the Sparkle would have to be updated. But you're just saying, similar to what Fabian said, that it's an update process. That's life. You can manage that. You're not too stressed out.
Yeah. Now, maybe I missed something. I didn't realize you were planning to change 45 URIs.
Rebecca, do you have that spreadsheet that Dan put together?
They really aren't. Okay. Oops.
It's no classes, right? Is it all properties?
It's some object properties and where are we here? Oh, here it is. Okay. So actually, it's not even that many.
Well, at first I thought he was only changing the orange ones, but the orange was the exception where he decided to leave it alone.
I don't know. I didn't quite understand the color coding, but
the orange ones were the ones he decided that could stay the same.
Oh, okay.
So everything.
Oh,
there's a lot of changes. I mean,
so like from 56. Yeah, there's about 50 or so, and then There's about 60 or so total changes.
And any given ontology is probably going to use a percentage of those, maybe a third, maybe less, maybe a little bit more.
Right.
And what's the general gist of the changes? Why so many?
Let me go back. Let me go back to the style guide for that. So the local naming.
I was just going to say consistency in naming. Like, you know, one place for object properties we have a verb, and other places we don't. So we want everything to be has party instead of one being party and one has target and one target. You know what I mean? It's things like that that are really just inconsistencies in property naming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'd say for the most part.
That's the main thing, really.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The truth is, if there's 10 versus if there's 50, you're going to have to do some kind of automation and doing the checking anyway. So it's more work.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody could write a sed script to do it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that. Well said.
Yeah, the trick is that you've got to search and destroy in the well, we're going to do the ontology part, but obviously data generation, Sparkle queries, and Shackle are all the places you'd have to look that I can think of off the top of my head.
And then hopefully you didn't code to the domain model, but sometimes people do.
Yep.
Yeah.
This raises the importance of having all the impact analysis chain.
Yep.
Tracked down. We're migrating in that direction ourselves.
Okay.
But for no other reason, we should do that just so we know how to do it.
The time card system, I think.
That's true.
Okay, well, that's good feedback. It doesn't seem like anybody is violently opposed.
Yeah. I mean, for instance, I'm going to end up having to do it to our time card system. I mean, it's woefully, I think it's still based on 6.7, so I'm woefully out of date anyway, but, you know.
Pretty good function.
Yeah.
Good learning function.
Yeah, you know, interesting sidelight to this is we have debated as we're building out the data-centric architecture, you know, the idea of free-form queries versus essentially queries that are stored in the store. It does point out that when you are doing these sort of ontology changes, that a more centralized place where you know the queries all are, you know, parameterized queries or whatever, certainly would help with this impact analysis, right? As opposed to people put Sparkle queries in code and I have no idea how many pieces of software are using this, you know, whereas if you say no one can do a free form except maybe you know, a developer or an admin, you know, have their ad hoc consoles, but generally speaking, we're not under obligation to fix that sort of ad hoc querying. You know, once things are in a production system, they're always going to live here, you know, as the equivalent of parameterized stored procedures, and then you'd be pretty easy to find those things. Same with Shackle.
So does that mean that there'd be literally no Sparkle queries in code, and they would always point to a file that's managed centrally?
Well, you might go to a service call or something, right? You'd go to a service call that issues a named query and gives it parameters. I want the, you know, time card for this month. Yeah. I had a different subject in the last minute here, but just we talked about how everyone has access, and we're talking about, you know, people maybe shouldn't make changes without discussing. I just wanted to confirm that, you know, there are certain committer privileges, right, on the GIST repo. We're not saying anyone can commit to developer master, but
there are only 2 or 3 of us that can actually commit to develop and master.
Right. So the point is, no one can get in too much trouble. They could if they wanted to, and maybe we're saying let's discuss it first, but they could create their own. Worst cases, let's say it that way. They could create their own branch and say, hey, someone should pull this change that no one ever discussed, but they can't actually change the develop or the master branch, right?
Right, correct.
Yeah. What we're saying is, rather than even going kind of rogue in that sense, though you might do it as an idea, I suppose, but you know, to just get an idea on quote on paper. But the point is, I just want to make sure it's not that wide open. Yeah.
Right. No.
We're going to jump off now. Got another meeting coming up. Thanks a lot, Rebecca. You did a
that was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Me too, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do I. Sorry.
Okay, great, no problem. We can all
Bye-bye.
jump off. Bye.
Cheerio.
Okay. Good job,
Thank you,
Rebecca.
bye.
Thank you for
Thanks.
explaining all this.